Welcome back to another edition of the Giants Huddle podcast. John Schmeelk with you. It's all brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the New York Giants. Joined today by friend of the program, Albert Breer, who is the lead NFL reporter for Sports Illustrated, among other things on his plate. Albert, good to see you, man. How are you?
Good to see you, John.
All right, so you're here covering the Giants. I like to ask the national guys when they come here a simple question to start the show to kind of kick us off.
Yep.
When you show up here to the Giants, what's the first thing you want to ask about, find out, or get a little in-depth on when you talk to the people around the organization?
I think the quarterback thing's obviously been sitting out there, and Daniel Jones now 9 months off of surgery. Where is he at? Obviously, the other night, things didn't go his way. And so
no, you're right.
And kind of seeing where he's at coming out of that, it'll be interesting. So, I think with a lot of teams, you're looking at what's happening in quarterback, whether it's good, bad, somewhere in the middle. I'd say right now they're probably somewhere in the middle. And then, I think the amount of buzz that Malik Nabers has generated, and getting to see him in person, I have had the chance to see Marvin Harrison and Rome Odunze.
Oh, tell me about
my
him.
trip, so like getting to see them versus Nabers, which, I think these three guys have a chance. This has a chance to be, like the Julio, AJ Green class, and, it was interesting because, when I first heard there might be a team or two that likes Malik more than Marvin, at first I didn't believe it. It sounded like pre-draft BS, and we sort through a lot of that every year. But the more I dug in, it wasn't really an affront to Marvin so much as it was a compliment to Malik. And where, if, one of them is Julio, then the other one might be AJ, where that was really considered in 2011, kind of a generational receiver class. This might be one too, and then you have the third guy on top of it in Rome, who's a really good player as well. And so, what I saw from Marvin was everything looks easy for him. He's so smooth, and just the way he is able to contort his body to manipulate the defender and put himself in a position to make a play after the catch.
It's like a 6'3" guy that moves like a 5'10" guy. It's crazy.
It's amazing when you look at Brian Hartline, who's his receivers coach and now the offensive coordinator at Ohio State, told me this a couple of years ago, and it's one of those things you can't unsee, is that he's got the legs of somebody who's 5'11", and he's very low cut. Which is why he's able to kind of move and throttle down, and throttle up, coming in and out of his breaks. And like Hart would always say, he moves like his dad did because his build from the waist down is like his dad.
Interesting.
And yet he's got this big long torso that allows him to play like a bigger player, which makes him really unique. Rome is just, you think about the bigger guys who maybe didn't have the top end breakaway speed. He's sort of one of those. Larry Fitzgerald might be the wrong comp because Larry Fitzgerald's one of the greatest ever, but that's sort of the style of player I think Rome becomes as an NFL player. Maybe not quite what Fitz was, because again, that's a really high bar, but that style of player. And then, Malik Nabers, and again, I'm excited to see it in person, but Malik Nabers is kind of the guy who is very fast, can make plays after the catch, is strong, more of the catch and run guy, than the other two are. So I'm excited to see Malik. And then, I think a huge swing factor, and I don't think anybody in this building would disagree with this, a huge swing factor for the team is going to be how the offensive and defensive lines play, which is, a lot of teams, but yeah, getting to see what the offensive line looks like remade, with Runyon and Illuminor in there now, and they hope they can get more out of Neal, and then what the defensive front looks like with Dexter and Kayvon and Brian Burns coming over from Carolina. I think really that's kind of how those two groups play, I think, determines how far the Giants could go.
I agree 100% with everything you said. So let's dig into the first thing you said, because I do think, and look, we took calls on our show after the Giants game against Houston. All the calls are about Daniel Jones. That's what Giant fans want to talk about right now. That's just we are where we're at, right?
And that's the sport, right? That's the sport. It's like every team.
If you want to win, you need a quarterback. Yeah. That's the way it goes, right? So when you say the Giants are in the middle, what do you mean by that?
I think it's maybe not knowing exactly what you're going to get out of the position right now. And it was really good 2 years ago. Obviously, last year you have the injury. They were expecting a lot out of DJ last year. Even before the injury, it was more scattershot than it had been the year before.
Yeah, of course, what was going on around him was also a lot worse than it was the year before, too.
Yeah, and so obviously this is a critical year for Daniel Jones.
Yep.
This is the last bit of his guaranteed money in that big contract he signed a couple of years ago, or a couple off seasons ago. And so what they get out of that position, what he looks like versus, and what has he looked like versus Drew Lock in practice, and how that kind of sets the course for the franchise moving forward. Like, I think even if it's not as good as it was 2 years ago, I think Brian Daboll and his staff are good enough to coach around it, right? I think from a big picture perspective, it's obviously going to have a massive impact on what this looks like. And I do think that they've done a good job in getting the roster to a point now where, like I'll make the comparison to Chicago. Like, they were able to build in Chicago to where now Caleb Williams is walking into a pretty good situation.
Really good situation.
You know what I mean?
For
like
sure.
Where he's got Rome and he's got Keenan Allen and he's got DJ Moore, and Darnell Wright was a top 10 pick on the offensive line for them. And so they don't need him to be Superman.
Right.
They've sort of built a situation here with the Giants where they can do that next year. They can sell out and go get a quarterback if it doesn't work out. So just from a big picture standpoint, that's what I mean when I say they're in the middle. Like, I don't think it's the worst quarterback situation in the league. It's certainly not the best. And I think that there's this gray area there where, this goes without saying, like how this all plays out over 17 games is going to chart the course for a lot of things for the franchise going forward.
Yeah, you're talking about building around him. I think the Giants seem to think that, I'm not going to use the word solved because I think you never solve problems in this league. You only kind of make it okay for a while. But I do think they believe they'll have a better situation up front on the offensive line this year than they've had the last couple. Yeah. And a big part of that is Carmen Brasillo, a guy that I'm sure you knew from your time covering the Patriots a lot up there. So what do you think the impact he's going to have? And he's brought a couple of his guys from Vegas with him, and Jermaine Illuminor, Greg Van Roten. They've signed John Runyon. You could argue with the improvement of John Michael Schmitz and Andrew Thomas being healthy this year, they could theoretically be a little bit better at every offensive line position this year than they were last year, and a new offensive line coach. How do you think Brasillo is going to impact what they do here, and how much better do you think this line could be?
I mean, I think the first part of it is just the synergy with Brian Daboll and the history that those two guys have in that system, and knowing exactly what you want from every position, and knowing how the offensive line fits in the bigger context of the scheme is a big part of it, right? Like, so, you go out and you get, a Jermaine Illuminor who, is going to know the expectations and is going to know what's being taught and can be a veteran in the room, and, played for both the Patriots and the Raiders, and, was in that system. So, I think just as far as how the whole thing fits together, I think it's a big plus. And Carmen comes from a system that's, proven to be able to churn out offensive linemen. And some of the things they did in New England over the years, and, I have like a lot of background there, but I remember, I was there when Stephen Neal was turned from a college wrestler into a Pro Bowl guard. I was there to see what they were able to do when they had guys go down, and they had built like such versatility into what they were doing, where, when they lost their left tackle, they had, Sebastian Vollmer who could flip over to left tackle and play that position.
Yeah, they didn't spend big on the line and use a bunch of first round picks. They just kind of trained guys up.
They were able to develop it. So you hope that, Carmen Brasillo can bring a little bit of that too.
You're ready for a change. Payday comes early with Citizens, so go to that retreat. New you moves to the country. Now you're raising goats and launching a lifestyle brand. Are you ready for all that life brings?
No question about it. And then the wide receiver room, I think, and we've already talked about Neighbors a little bit.
Yeah.
He makes a big impact. And I think when you look around the league, Albert, when you can put that one in there, the guy that you would slot in, everyone slots down, right? So the other guys, I think, are benefited by Neighbors being there, and they can slide into those roles and be better players because you're not asking them to be something they're not.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge part of it. It just changes the math in so many different ways. You know what I mean? It just changes how you're going to cover. If this guy is going to pull coverage with him, well, then everybody else can be a complementary piece. And I do think that that's a big part of that's a big part of the problem here the last few years was that you had a bunch of complementary pieces. And yeah, Saquon was obviously a huge threat out of the backfield.
But he's running back.
That's not a guy who's going to be carrying coverage, So, the question becomes how quickly you can get Malik Neighbors to the point, because he's obviously got the potential to get there. But how quickly can you get him to the point where he is that player? Can that happen as a rookie? And I think that's an open question. But I think the good news is he surprised them a little bit with his aptitude and how quickly he's picked up things, which is massive in Brian Daboll's offense, because they're going to be asking guys to play all three receiver spots. And if you're going to be the number one guy, it's one of the reasons why Steph Diggs was such a good fit for what they were doing in Buffalo, because Steph was able to do those sorts of things. They were able, because of how smart he is and where his football IQ is, they were able to move him around a bunch. How quickly can you get Neighbors to the point where he is that guy? I think that determines how quickly then you can slot the other guys like Slayton. You can slot the other guys into maybe roles that are a little bit more befitting of what they bring to the table from a skill set standpoint.
The other potential change you might have this year, and Brian Daboll has not announced this is what his scheme in the regular season, but given the fact he's called plays in every practice and preseason game so far, something tells me he's probably begin calling plays when the regular season starts. What kind of impact do you think that will have on this offense compared to what we saw the last couple of years? Because just in that one preseason game against Houston, they threw the ball downfield more in a half than they did in full games last year.
Well, I mean, I think part of it is like, you hired me for a reason, and you hired me because you liked what you saw from me as an offensive coordinator. And so, why don't I go back to, if there's something that I can do to help the team, maybe that's a lever that we pull.
Let me cook.
I mean, he's very creative. And I think the people in Buffalo would tell you this, it's just like seeing the bigger picture for the game and being able to, know how to set defenses up and then exploit certain things. He's excellent, in those areas, and obviously was a play caller in a lot of different situations, having done it in Kansas City and Miami, at Alabama, and then in Buffalo, he was able to do it with lots of different types of players. So he has a huge library, of levers that he can pull, and a huge library of ways to set things up and ways to game plan and all of that different stuff. And so, now in his third year as a head coach, I think being able to pull on that lever is something that is probably, I think, a little easier for him, having his feet underneath him, being the guy in charge. And, history would tell us that he's pretty good at it when he can really get an offense rolling.
Football season is coming, and so is the next college semester. If you need funding, a Citizens student loan can help you pay for 100% of your school-certified costs. Get your rate quote in about 2 minutes at citizensbank.com/pay-for-college. All right, Albert, let's switch to the defense quick before we kind of go around the league a bit here. Shane Bowen, new defensive coordinator. They bring in Brian Burns. You mentioned the three guys up front that I think they hope will maybe carry the defense, might be a little bit strong, but certainly be the impact players on this defense. How do you see this whole thing coming together under new DC? It was a very different system than Wink Martindale had last year, with really now the focus in the offseason has been making that front as deadly as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big things that I always do when I'm looking at free agents, and this is something that an executive gave me years and years and years ago, is ask why the guy is available. And I think that was what made Burns unique, was that he was available because things had really gotten sideways from a personal standpoint, where he just didn't want to go back there. And the negotiation had gotten really sour between he and the team, and they turned down that massive offer from the Rams in the middle of 2022, and he just wasn't going back there. So, there was this just very unique opportunity to go and get a guy who's still young, who I think is 26 now, right? Yep. Mm-hmm. Who's still very young, and who has a premium skill, and you have background on him because of who your general manager is and the relationships that he has in Carolina and the relationships he has with the GM down there. And so I think a big part of this is you're going in and you're getting somebody else's number one pass rusher. It's not a number two you're projecting to be a number one. And we talked about the effect that a number one receiver can have. Well, a top shelf pass rusher can have that same effect. So if he can come in and be the player he was a couple of years ago for the Panthers, now all of a sudden, like Kayvon Thibodeau seeing different matchups on the other side, and Dexter Lawrence is harder to double team. And so I just think that there's a real chance for Brian Burns to be a multiplier. And I like that they were as aggressive as they were in going after him, because it's just a really unique opportunity to see a player like that at that position become available. And usually you have to draft and develop those ones, which is what they're trying to do with Thibodeau. I was surprised there actually wasn't more of a market for Brian Burns when he came available after the 2023 season.
Yeah, 26-year-old pass rushers that have had at least 8 sacks in all 5 of his years. They just don't become available, generally speaking. You're 100% right. In the modern NFL, we've seen this with some teams, the Eagles, I think, to some extent over the past couple of years, where a really good pass rush can cover up some warts in the back end on the secondary.
Yep.
The Giants can be rolling out a bunch of young guys out there, man. Deontay Banks is in his 2nd year, and like Jason Pinnock's in his 3rd. Those are the vets of the group. Dane Belton and Tyler Nubin, a rookie, Andrew Phillips, a rookie, Cordell Flott, a 3rd-year guy. A lot of youth out there. Can they figure out a way where that pass rush can help mitigate some of the danger in playing such a young secondary?
I think like in the beginning, it's going to have to be the answer. You know what I mean? Like you're going to have Deontay Banks is going to have to become a guy that can be a number one corner.
Yeah.
And like when you need to match someone up with, and I haven't looked at the schedule. I haven't studied the schedule quite as close.
Justin Jefferson, week 1.
But I can say, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Terry McLaurin,
A.J. Brown,
A.J. Brown. Like you've got guys in the division where it's like, if you want to match up, you can. Deontay Banks is on him to become that guy, and then if he's the number one guy, then things can start to flow down from there. Who's the number 2 corner going to be? I think you're counting on Phillips to be your nickel.
Yeah.
The pass rush is a huge part of it, and then I think getting the development from Banks is critical to making it work with a younger group back there.
All right, let's talk about the NFC East very quickly here. They have not been in the stratosphere of the Cowboys and Eagles the last 4 or 5 years, however you want to break that down. But I feel like there's some vulnerabilities for the first time with Dallas and Philly this year.
Yeah.
Philly, I'll use the word because I think it's accurate. They collapsed at the end of last year, right? They really fell apart. The Giants beat them for the first time in forever in the last week of the year. And then Dallas, they lose a lot of talent in the offseason, new defensive coordinator, all these contract issues with the coaches and the players and all that stuff. Do you see some vulnerability with those two teams in the NFC?
Yeah.
Maybe the Giants aren't good enough to catch them, but I don't feel like they're like pencil them for 12 or 13 wins and rock and roll.
I mean, Dallas clearly has a lot going on.
A little bit, right?
Between CD and between McCarthy being a contract year, Dax in a contract year, Micah is eligible for a contract for the first time, and he could wind up being the first $40 million non-quarterback. Like, there's a lot happening there, and how does that affect the health of the team? And I think having a veteran coach helps, and the fact that Mike's able to kind of manage his own situation helps, and there's still talent there. There's always talent in Dallas.
They draft well, man. When you draft well, you're always going to have talent.
They draft really well, and they've been able to manage it. And for all of their warts, like they've consistently fielded one of the best rosters in football, like every year, right?
12 wins straight, 3 straight years.
And so, like you wonder how much the outside stuff's going to affect them. Philly's got just so many moving parts. Now, I'd say it's a credit to them how much they've invested in the lines of scrimmage to be able to withstand losing Jason Kelsey and Fletcher Cox at once, right? But those are two, tentpole leaders. Those are two guys that were, icons for that franchise. And so they have guys, Cam Jurgens on offense, has been starting, and move him over to center. And you have Landon Dickerson on the interior there too. Defensively, obviously Jordan Davis and
Jalen Carter.
And Jalen Carter could be a monster for them. So they've got players. So how does the leadership change coming out of last year with those two guys gone? And then you consider, you go to the coaching level, and you've got 2 new coordinators, in Kellen Moore and Vic Fangio. And I know for Nick, like one of the big things has been trying to recreate the mix that they had there 2 years ago. They felt like they had a really special camaraderie. And they've spent a lot of time trying to recapture that, right? Like what they had during their Super Bowl run. they're going to need it, because there is so much change there. And so, yeah, I mean, I think both Philly and Dallas are really talented, but some of the changing circumstances there certainly could affect where they go.
How quickly can the Commanders do this, you think, under Dan Quinn? Rookie quarterback. Two things worry me. Their offensive line and their secondary on defense. And those are two things that I'm having trouble convince myself they can work around.
I would say that if you're a Commanders fan, your hope should be for them to ascend as the year goes on. Mm-hmm. So, they might be 3-6. Can you get to where you're flirting with 500 at the end of the year?
Right.
They feel really good about their rookie class, Jaden obviously has been great, and he's checked every box. And I was with the Jets yesterday, and they were like, this kid's going to be a star.
Really?
Really, really good. And they saw him in a practice setting, But they also feel really good about Mikey Sandersill, who comes from Michigan, who they feel like has been,
I loved him coming out.
He could be a
player.
captain as a rookie.
Wow.
Sanat, Brandon, the tight end from K-State, Brandon Coleman, who could be their left tackle. They feel really good about the young players they have, but they're still really young. And they're going to be relying on a lot of young players in a lot of key spots. And, they know they've got some work to do from a roster standpoint where it's on the perimeter, right? So tackle, edge rusher, corner. They've got major questions. Receiver a little bit less so because they've got Terry McLaurin there. But, they've got to fill multiple premium positions, and you can't do that all in one off season. So I think the hope for them has to be they're able to get the program off the ground, be really competitive over the first half of the season, and then start to put that over the top of the few wins at the end of the season where you're really excited about where you're at going into 2025. I like what Dan Quinn and Adam Peters are doing there. It's just not an overnight fix.
You love turf. You're good at it. So you start a turf biz. Business grows, your savings grow. Become the most celebrated name in turf. Are you ready for all that life brings?
No, I'm with you on that. As you travel around the league, you visit a bunch of training camps, who are maybe two teams that you don't think enough people are talking about that could make some noise in the league this year, that you've liked what you've seen traveling to different camps?
So I think Seattle's really interesting.
Okay. It's a good division.
Because they have and that's the thing. I'd almost say the same thing about Arizona because both those teams have a huge classes, draft classes, on rookie contracts. So in Seattle, it's the second and third year guys. In Arizona, it's the first and second year guys. And I think where Seattle's at, coming out of the Pete Carroll era with Mike McDonald being there, and you have Geno, who is a steady veteran presence and
he's played well for them.
Really, really well. He doesn't get the credit he deserves, but he's played really well. Kenneth Walker, when I was there, if you want a fantasy alert here, draft Kenneth Walker. He's going to be really good for them. The young tackles, Charles Cross and Abe Lucas, who they drafted a couple years ago. Jackson Smith and Jigba. On the defensive side, Byron Murphy is a rookie. They expect him to be really good. They thought there was no way he was going to be available where he was. And, on that defensive line, they've got Boye Mafe and Derek Hall. And then in the secondary, Reek Woolen and Devin Witherspoon. It's just, you start to go down the list, and it's there's a lot of impressive young players where if those guys can all collectively take a step, they could sneak into the playoffs. So that'd be one.
I like that one. That's a good one.
In the AFC, it's hard to find a surprise team in the AFC because, the one team that I think is getting a little overlooked that I think could be a problem is Indianapolis. And I just think that because I think Shane Steichen's excellent. I think a huge part of why Jalen Hurts took a step back last year was losing Shane Steichen.
I agree with you.
He was a massive part of their Super Bowl team 2 years ago. And I think he did an excellent job last year. And they were on the doorstep of the playoffs after losing their quarterback in the first month of the season. And they had to rejigger what they were doing offensively to fit Gardner Minshew rather than Anthony Richardson.
Still almost made the playoffs, by the way.
Yeah. And then, they really feel good about their rookies, Laiatu Latu coming in from UCLA. Now, his health is a question, but if he can stay healthy, should be excellent. A.D. Mitchell has made a good impression there early on.
Has he?
I just think you look at that team and that coaching staff, and I have a lot of faith in Shane's ability, and I'm not saying they're gonna beat out a really good Houston team in the AFC South, but I wouldn't be surprised if that division comes down to the last 2 or 3 weeks, because Indianapolis is, I think, strong enough across the board to be there in the end, and that division in general is another one that I think's gotten a little bit better.
The two divisions the Giants play, just 2 more questions, is the AFC North, which is going to be a bloodbath this year, and then the NFC South, which is kind of a bloodbath in a different way. Both divisions have teams really close. I think they're in different tiers, but they're teams that I think both divisions are going to be super competitive. How do you see those two divisions kind of breaking it down a little bit?
Yeah, so I would say the NFC South, you want to talk about not getting enough credit. Tampa has been in the playoffs 4 years in a row.
Has it really been 4 years in a row?
Yeah, so they've been in the playoffs 4 years in a row.
Like in the Brady years, it makes sense.
They lose Brady. They lose Brady. They still win the division. Baker, I think, is in a really good place right now, and still a really well balanced roster. And you've got a lot of guys there that have rings. So your Mike Evans, your Chris Godwins, your Levante Davids. Your Vita Vez, there's Tristan Wirfs, there's a lot of guys that were there for the championship.
Sure.
So I know there's excitement over Atlanta. I'd be a little concerned about their defense.
Me too.
Going and getting Judon and Simmons, I think
it'll help.
It'll help, and I think it's also confirmation that they were worried about it.
That's a good point.
And then I think so. I haven't made my picks yet. I think I'll pick Tampa to win the South, and then.
I'm sure the Saints think they're going to be in the mix there too. I'm not sure if they will be, but I'm sure they think they're going to be in the mix there too.
Yeah, the Saints is just, it's a matter of some of your key players not getting old there, guys who've been there forever.
They're a very boring team, but they're still going to win 9 games.
Though.
Exactly.
So Kamara's got mileage on his legs. How does he look coming back? Is Lattimore still got it as number one corner? How does Cam Jordan look as their primary pass rusher? Yeah, the AFC North should be exciting, man. I the Browns make the playoffs with 5 different quarterbacks. Pittsburgh was in the playoffs again. What is that going to look like at quarterback? I think that's still an open question. Baltimore's Baltimore. I think Cincinnati has a chance to be in the Super Bowl, and I just think Burrow went through a lot over the last 9 months. I still think for my money. If you're talking about a quarterback, you're drafting a quarterback for the next 10 years, it's Mahomes and then it's Burrow.
Ooh, Burrow 2 for you. All right, nice.
I think he plays a sustainable game. The injury was a scary thing for him, but he's kind of coming through that now. And I think there's real urgency there because they know, relatively soon they're going to have to build the roster a different way. So probably T. Higgins last year there. Jamar Chase is going to get paid.
He's going to show up, right? Chase, they're going to work that out, right?
And I think that'll work out. And I think part of it's waiting on what happens with Lamb, Trey Hendrickson. That's another contract situation they've got to work out. But I think it will get worked out. I do think that there's an urgency there. And it's part of why they were reluctant to move Higgins, even though they know, all right, this is probably a 1-year thing. Is because they do feel like they've got a really special group in-house now, and they want to give that group a chance to make a real run at it. So
similar to what Sanford's trying to deal with Ayuk, right? They want to make the run with Ayuk.
This is another one. I just said it with Indianapolis. That team almost made the playoffs with Jake Brown. I mean, was right there with Jake Brown
last week of the year.
Yeah. So I think Cincinnati's got a chance to not just win the North, but win the conference.
All right, final question, because I thought you kind of, when you talked about Washington, you did a real good job kind of framing what their season should look like and what their fans should be thinking about when they watch them.
Yeah.
So I'll ask you the same question about the Giants as we close here. As Giant fans embark on 2024 here, what should be their goals or expectations? Realistically, what should they be hoping to see as the season kicks off?
My goal, if I were being realistic about it, now we're working in this building, I think the goal would be that the young talent comes together midway through the year. And what I said about the Commanders, I would say it on another level with the Giants, because they are a better roster than the Commanders right now. They're further along in the building process. And I think getting it to a point where you can manage around Daniel Jones and you can get the most out of Daniel Jones, because I think that's what they were so effective with 2 years ago. And that's going to take being being right on the offensive line, being right about John Runyon, being right about Jermaine Luminor, getting more out of Evan Neal, like having better answers up front, I think is the first part of it. And then defensively, the pass rush being what they think it can be on paper. So I think like this has got potential because they're so strong on the lines of scrimmage. And one thing I've learned over 20 years covering the league is like if you're good on the lines of scrimmage, you're going to be in every game.
You have a chance.
Right. Like I think this can be a team that can learn how to win again. And I wouldn't rule them out winning the division. Like I think they've got the potential to win the division. But a lot of things have to come together. And again, like those things might not come together until week 6, week 8. And, same sort of thing as with the Commanders. Like you'd hope things would come together where you've got a chance to get hot in November and December.
I know you're on with Dan Patrick, and he talked to you about the front office and the head coach. My sense is that, and just from working in the building, that Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll have a pretty good handle on this and how they want to build this and how they're bringing things together. And from watching Hard Knocks, I'm sure you did as well, it seems like ownership has faith in them to do this the right way. Just what's your take on kind of Schoen and Daboll and kind of how they've done this the last couple of years?
I think they've done a good job. And I think they were realistic about it, where it was going to take some time and there was going to have to be a teardown to build back up. And I do think part of it, I mean, if you look at like what happened in Buffalo, it's sort of similar, right? Where in 2017 they made the playoffs for the first time and in forever. I think it was the first time in 18 years. And Joe was there. Dave's wasn't there yet, but they went through that. They established their program in Buffalo, and then that sort of helped facilitate the rebuild, where they showed, whether it's ownership, players, whatever, like we have a blueprint that works. And then, okay, like now we've got to reset the roster. Now we've got to shed the dead cap, and now we have to go get the quarterback. And so, like, I think Buffalo is the template, and I know that that's been kind of drilled into the ground here, but it's true. Like the template is, like you have gone and you've given everyone proof of concept in year 1. You came back and you reset in year 2 and changed a lot of things in the roster and took it on the chin a little bit. And now, I think you have a chance to go forward and build something sustainable. So,
and you said ownership will be patient and let them do
I
it.
think so. Yeah, like I honestly, John, I got that question. It's sort of like, I mean, it's amazing how quickly we forgot how good they were a year ago and how it seemed like those guys were going to be around for 10 years.
Brian Daboll won Coach of the Year.
Now these questions come up, and it happens. It feels like it keeps happening faster. The one thing I would say is I can remember the end of Joe Judge and Dave Gettleman here, and I can say on pretty good authority, like John Mara didn't want to fire those guys. Like John Mara, I don't think wanted to be the guy who had gone through 3 different 2-and-outs.
McAdoo, Shermer, or Judge.
Right.
Yep.
And going 2-and-out, 2-and-out, 2-and-out. Like he never wanted the Giants ever to be that. And no one does, but like their view of their own franchise was never, you are never that.
They want to be like the Steelers.
Even if you're bad, you are never that.
They want to be like the Steelers. We have the same coach for 15 years.
Right. And so to get yourself out of that, at some point you got to stop doing it,
Right.
And so I think the intention was we're going to stop doing that with Joe Judge as our head coach. And that didn't work out. So I think, John Mara, the rest of ownership, like I think they're going to have resolve to stay the course with this group.
Albert, what a wealth of knowledge. We really appreciate it, man. Thank you for doing this. Always here for you, whatever you need. Thank you so much for the time.
All right, thanks, John.
That's the Giants Huddle podcast brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. We'll see you next time, everybody.